How's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. How are things on your end?
Doing great here. Doing great. I am so excited to have a conversation with you. And this conversation is about adult ADHD and specifically mindfulness as it relates to adult ADHD. So it's a topic that I really am passionate about myself, and I know that you are too. And so I really look forward to learning a little bit about your perspective of how those two things mesh, because I hear a lot of adults with ADHD who are like, I can't meditate. I can't slow down. I can't sit still. Nichole, I want to start by just asking you to tell me a little bit about yourself. I know you from Instagram and also the coaching world, but tell me a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Nicole. I am also a therapist and a coach. I've actually most of my therapy career, actually all of my therapy career since all the way back to my practicum, I have worked primarily with eating disorders. And so that's where my career started. I went to grad school out in Boulder, Colorado, and so kind of like practicum and internship, worked in eating disorders out in the Denver area. I later in life, as I like moved into Wisconsin to be near family, got settled into being a therapist, had my first child. I also discovered I have ADHD. I had always thought maybe something.
Yeah.
But as you may know, in the clinical world, especially in grad school, we were not really taught anything about ADHD. So it just went unnoticed for basically my whole life. But yeah, so I'm a therapist and I'm a mom, as I mentioned. Actually, I now have a 1 year old, little over 1 year old. I think he's 14 months technically now. And then let's see, what else do I do with my life?
You're also an ADHD coach now too, right?
This is true. Yes, I do. I also last year, actually, while I was on maternity leave, because my ADHD brain couldn't just be on maternity leave, I jumped into launching this coaching practice because it was something I'd been thinking about for a long time, and finally just kind of had the downtime ish, as much of downtime as maternity leave is, to really like wrap my brain around what that would look like and what I would want it to look like and what I would all want to like have be pieces of that, especially as far as like mindful awareness and things go. So it's a little bit of my origin story and how I got here.
Excellent. And I love that. So you spent time in the mountains, you spent time just with eating disorder clients, and then also through that evolution found out that you had ADHD as well as an adult. And so
Yeah.
yeah, that's my journey too, as far as like I didn't know I had ADHD until I was an adult because it just wasn't, it was always thought about as that hyperactive male child in a classroom versus female inattentive type of ADHD. So
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's same why it got missed in me. Although looking back, I just laugh sometimes, like thinking about stories from when I was a kid or just these things where I'm like, it was so obvious.
did it.
My mom's even been like, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I'm like, it's okay. I mean, don't know what you don't know. You didn't do anything wrong. It was the 90s when I was a kid, and that was what it pretty much was. Like little boys who were hyperactive got diagnosed, usually got put on a medication, and like that was that. There wasn't even a lot of talk about either coaching or therapy, or any support outside of like that back
Medication.
then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. So it was 2018 when I had just returned to work from my maternity leave, and I had said something to my boss, who's also a clinician and had been for 15 plus years at this point. I said something during a meeting with her along the lines of like, "Oh, I think I have ADHD," and she kind of just looked at me and goes, "You think?" And I was just like, "Well, you could have told me. That would have been
She
great."
had already diagnosed you, but
So
just
this was already apparently very obvious to her. She's like, yeah, I could tell just like the way you left the kitchen all the time, which apparently I would leave cabinets open or I would leave my lunchbox in there. Or while I was pregnant, I lost my keys in the refrigerator. And like the whole office was looking for them for like an hour and they were in the fridge. So apparently this was very obvious to her, less obvious to me, but it did make a lot of things make sense. So then I did pursue formal diagnosis and all of that. And I actually then pursued a specialty in ADHD because I was like, how does this get missed? I'm like, I am 30 years old at that point, and how did this get missed for 30 years? And so I did a certification
Mhm.
course to just learn more. And then the overlap between neurodivergency and eating disorders is especially interesting too. And so that like became this like niche within a niche for me, really.
I don't know much about that as far as how it fits with eating disorders, but that is fascinating.
Yeah, there's a pretty there's a higher rate of eating disorders amongst people with ADHD, actually, and I think a lot of reasons for that, whether it's just kind of accidentally forgetting to eat and then it becomes
Mhm.
sort of a coping mechanism, or sensory issues. I think there's just so many different variables, and then the treatment for people who are both neurodivergent and have eating disorders just has to look different than it does for a more like neurotypical person with an eating disorder. And so
Absolutely.
that's, yeah, been a big rabbit hole I've been down the last several years.
Love it. That's a great specialty. And there's a lot of people out there that need that help, it sounds
Mhm, mhm.
like. Awesome.
Yeah.
I would love to hear more about, so on your journey of finding out, and it within a couple of years, it sounds like after your maternity leave, you found out that you had adult ADHD. When did you start blending mindfulness and ADHD? And when did you start feeling like mindfulness could be helpful with ADHD?
Yeah. Before I knew I had ADHD, I say this a lot of like it kind of was like my medicine or a medicine, a tool for my ADHD before long before I knew I had it. I went to Naropa University out in Boulder, which is a Buddhist founded university. And so my master's degree is in mindfulness based transpersonal counseling psychology, which is a mouthful. Um, but basically it's a very like holistic looking program of like looking at a person as more than just their symptoms. That's where that transpersonal piece comes in. And then everything, like we wove mindfulness into kind of everything. We had every semester of class there was at least one mindfulness course happening in the curriculum. We meditated at the beginning of most classes. We didn't wear shoes, like typical Boulder, Colorado stuff. um,
Stuff. I love it. Yes.
yeah, it was lovely. It's a lovely time. But yeah, so it was really just woven into how I learned to become a helping professional. And then it's also just along the way became something that just became an integral part of my life. And actually, not even the sitting on the cushion and being silent part, that part I actually kind of hated all through grad school. Once I even fell asleep, I sent an email out to my list about this once, but I was in one of my meditation courses and we were sitting for a long time. I think it was maybe an hour. It was like a 3 hour long class total. And we were sitting for the full first hour doing our, mindfulness practice in silence. And it was morning, and I'm also not a morning person. And all of a sudden I caught myself as I was like about to hit the ground.
About the face.
I mean, we were just on cushions, so I didn't fall very far, but like far enough for my neighbors to be disturbed.
Oops.
So, oops.
An hour is a long time, especially an adult with ADHD or a human in general. So yeah.
Right, right. So like naturally then I'm like, man, I really suck at this meditation thing. Like I don't know if I'm going to be able to like teach my clients this or use mindfulness. And then as time went on, I was learning that I just do so much better with things that are either more sensory based. So like actually having like a fidget toy, something like that to focus on as my anchor for meditating, or a walking meditation, or things like yoga or other movement. I even like weightlifting to me is very much like a mindfulness practice. So I just started to learn. Hiking was my biggest one out there. And not that I can't hike in Wisconsin, but it's not the same. But out there, hiking was probably my biggest like mindfulness practice. And so I started to learn like, oh, it really doesn't have to look like sitting on the cushion all the time in silence.
Yeah,
And
so
maybe
that's
I do
this.
better with that with music on or something else to have like my brain have some stimulation from. So
You
yeah, it kind of got woven in then. And then I learned there's actually research that backs up that ADHD really, or folks with ADHD really can benefit from mindful awareness practices, both just from having more, self-awareness, ability to regulate emotions, decreasing stress, coming down from overstimulation, even noticing you're overstimulated before you're like in meltdown mode. I mean, a lot of those types of things just are actually researched and they support it. And then I was like, this is beautiful. And so I kind of like wove the two together. And so a lot of my work is around mindful awareness and learning like a lot of emotion awareness and emotion regulation. So
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned you mentioned a lot of important things. So like sometimes there's failures and sometimes, and I'll share a story too. So my girlfriend and I were trying out meditation, trying out mindfulness and meditation at a yoga center for the first time. We didn't know what we were signing up for. We got there late and everybody else was already seated. So we like quietly went in. And then we realized it was a 45-minute long meditation. It was the first meditation I had ever done. And that was incredibly hard. We missed all the instruction, missed everything. We just noticed everybody was sitting in silence. And I left angrier. Like I left like not feeling peaceful at all.
irritated.
Yes. And so, like you said, that first experience or just one experience can kind of almost taint the whole idea or kind of make it seem like it's not a good idea at all or that I didn't want to try it again. But yeah, just keep trying different things. And you mentioned that it doesn't have to just be seated. It can be moving. It can involve fidget toys. It can involve nature hiking in Colorado or Wisconsin. And all of those different sensory based things I find them so necessary as well because it's sometimes the anchor, what they call an anchor is like just feeling the breath on the side of your nose or feeling the breath in your lungs. Sometimes I need more stimulation than that. And sometimes cats come in.
Sometimes cats come into the, this is Yoshi. I didn't know he was even in here. He was hiding under the bed on the other side of the room. So yeah, so can look a lot of ways for sure.
Yeah, and that's something I feel like a lot of people don't know about. A lot of people don't understand that meditation. Let me go back. A lot of people don't understand that mindfulness can look like a lot of things. And meditation and mindfulness are different in some ways that people think of cross-legged just sitting and breathing as meditation, and then they blend that with what mindfulness is. That could be a way to be mindful, but it's not the only way.
Right. Yeah, there are infinite ways. I think right now, some of my biggest ones are really, um, I love guided ones because, especially before bed, because I don't like falling asleep. It's boring. And so if I if I have a guided meditation on and I have like headphones that I can wear while I'm laying down, then they don't hurt my ears. So it's great for sensory, like people don't like headphones in.
Mhm.
But it's helpful for me. I fall asleep faster because I think it again gives my brain that like bit of stimulation, that focal point, that anchor, instead of my thoughts going all over the place or being in, ruminating on something I said earlier that day or, 10 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, so that's one big thing I do now, but also a lot of like moving. I just like to go for walks. And last summer when I was on maternity leave, it was great. I just walked every single day with kiddo in the stroller and just we'd go for 2-3 mile walks and
Mhm.
not really go anywhere, just walking. And it was lovely and so grounding and regulating and um yeah, or just finding the kind of like I love the phrase like ordinary magic in just the everyday mundane of like
Magic.
slowing down, paying attention on purpose to whatever it is you're doing, even if
Mhm.
it's the dishes, even if it's, you know, playing with your kids and you don't really feel like playing with your kids or doing pretend stuff, but just
Mhm.
slowing down and being really present in that moment. I think those are probably the biggest things I do right now to practice mindfulness.
Yeah, and all of that involves just noticing and getting out of our head, getting out of the whirlwind of thoughts or the distractions, getting out of maybe the low motivation state and just paying attention to details. And whether it's walking, like you said, like feeling your feet on the ground or feeling the sunshine on your skin and the dishes or doing every little details and focusing on the details in front of you, all of that is mindful.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And another misconception I hear out there is that it has to take a long time.
Mm-hmm.
What's
Yeah,
your opinion about that?
I agree. I think a couple minutes is plenty. I'm always, and especially when I'm working with people with ADHD, including myself in that, like something is better than nothing. And if all I have in me that day is to practice for a minute is better than nothing,
Mhm.
you know? And so it can certainly be, like when I was in grad school and we'd sit for an hour and then we would process it and reflect on it. Like it's great if you've got the time and the space and the ability to do that, but I don't think that's realistic for most people. And then especially someone with ADHD, like sitting on a cushion for an hour probably sounds like low-key torture. You
Yes.
you can go for a 5-minute walk around the block and just pay attention to, yeah, the sunshine or how your feet feel while you're walking, or whatever it may be there. But yeah, it does not have to be hours upon hours, or consistent. I think
Right.
consistency goes out the window for me too, because like, again, I think if you're telling someone with ADHD you have to do this every day or it doesn't count, they're going to get into all or nothing. And I speak from personal experience with that. Like it's going to get into all or nothing. And then I'm not going to want to do it, because then if I didn't do it right, then I failed.
Mhm.
And there's really no failing. It's all experiments. And you can just do a minute here and there when you think of it, and it builds over time. Maybe then suddenly you're doing 5 minutes, or maybe it becomes more of a 5-day week thing and not just 2 or 3.
Mhm.
All of it is just progress in a direction.
I completely agree. And it involves self-compassion and not judging ourselves as failures. And that's tricky sometimes because a lot of times it's built into the ADHD brain. It's built into the human brain sometimes to be judgmental, call ourselves failures, get into that all or nothing thinking. But mindfulness isn't about that. It's about just being in this moment and being kind of okay with whatever, okay with yourself and okay with things going on around you as well.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it really is just about being able to be with whatever is happening around you. And if there's loud children screaming or there's all that kind of stuff, just noticing it's there and knowing that kind of that like radical acceptance, it is what it is.
Mhm.
Kids are being kids. I am overstimulated. Maybe I need to step outside.
Yeah, and it like that, it's sometimes mindfulness can help us cue into our body. It can help us cue into what we need to take care of, how we need to take care of ourselves, or if we are overstimulated. I think I've talked to a lot of adults with ADHD who go from 0 stress to 100 stress. And that meltdown, like you mentioned earlier, it could happen very quickly. So being able to be aware and be mindful of maybe a tingle in the stomach or fist clenching or that feeling of like anxiety or I want to cry, like having awareness of those body cues can help us take care of ourselves better.
Yeah, yeah. It's like that quote from, I think it's from Viktor Frankl, from Man's Search for Meaning, about, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And he talks about like mindfulness gives us the space to kind of change our response and just gives you that space.
It gives us
Space can just be a minute or a breath. It doesn't even have to be fancy.
I was taught by an instructor one time. I went through a course about mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and she said, it 3 minutes before you start your workday, 3 minutes at your lunch break, or really just tuning into what you're eating, and then 3 minutes before you log off your computer, like trying to also pair it with things that you already have scheduled during your day. And
Right.
it doesn't have to be three. There's no magic three, but it can be one.
Right, right.
Even sitting
Have
in
it.
front of the computer and okay.
Or every time you're at a red light, that's when I'll kind of use with clients a lot of, okay, you're at a red light, that's when we're going to take a breath, or we're going to intentionally use like the stop skill of like stop, observe, um, stop, take a breath, observe, proceed mindfully. I'm like, how do I spell stop? That's how. Okay. But yeah, so yeah, I love that, pairing it with something that just kind of happens regularly so that it just becomes habit. And maybe you miss it once or twice or a few times throughout the day, but even if you did it once, still a win.
That's a success. Yeah, that is absolutely a success. Well, I love your perspective on that. And you have such a kind, compassionate way of treating yourself, it sounds like. And it also probably also it is how you teach your clients too to learn how to be compassionate with themselves during the process of learning. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Mindful self-compassion has been a big part of my own journey and my own work for myself. And yes, then definitely that influences how I help people, or how I try to help people reframe how they see themselves sometimes.
Mhm.
We are our own harshest critics most of the time.
Absolutely. And I think with a lifetime, and especially with a lot of adults with ADHD who just found out they had ADHD, um, they felt different or something was wrong with them for a long time. So it's hard to shake that feeling of feeling like I'm doing things wrong or I'm not good enough. And so, yeah, that mindful self-compassion is a beautiful, a beautiful thing to weave into our lives when we've been so hard on ourselves for so long.
Absolutely. Much needed.
Well, Nichole, what other creative outlets or activities or routines do you use to also help you with ADHD?
Yeah, I have so many. I am a big believer in having a big toolbox with lots of different things in it, and being able to switch those up depending on the season of life. Because I have things that, in this, quintessential ADHD, but I'll have things that I'll do consistently or work really well for a while, and then that kind of fizzles out. And rather than thinking like, oh, just like none of that stuff works anymore, I'm just going to ditch it all, I've found that just making sure I have different things to pick from is really helpful. So sometimes it's making sure I'm doing these, guided meditations before sleep so that I'm getting really good sleep. Sometimes I'm really into lifting weights, doing like kind of like heavier exercises like that. When I think those are more so during times I need a lot of grounding or just like a lot more stimulation.
Mhm.
And then sometimes I'm like, nope, I need gentler movement. So then I might be doing like on a streak of like doing yoga or just some stretching, and like I won't touch the weights for months, which is also a thing I used to be like, oh, why do I suck at this? Or so a lot of it's, I'd say a lot of my tools are like, yeah, physical movement. Being in nature is probably one of my biggest ones. Kind of no matter the weather, I love being out in nature when it's raining or when it's snowing or even when it's like really cold in the winter. All of it, because it all offers different sensory experiences. And um, yeah, nourishment. I'm okay with like being in food streaks. Like sometimes some foods I'll be on a major kick on one food, and allowing that and knowing that that's a food that feels really safe and comfortable to me right now for
Mhm.
whatever reason. And then one day that wears off and finding a new one. So yeah, I think it's just sometimes, I mean, medication is a piece of things. Also supplements are a piece of things for me too. So I like to like kind of pair a lot of different things and have a lot of things to choose from.
Beautiful, absolutely. Yeah, when we just have one thing to fall back on, one backup plan, and if that backup plan goes awry, then it can lead to kind of that meltdown or that total frustration, stress. So I also,
Oh, which were just sorry, that just reminded me. Another big one was buying a planner without dates in it, so that I love using a planner sometimes.
uh,
And it's really helpful for me if my schedule gets to a certain tipping point with balancing coaching, therapy, everything. I love having the time blocked and kind of my master planner versus my electronic schedules.
yeah.
But then it falls away for a while. And having a planner that doesn't have dates in it is beautiful, because if I don't use it for a few weeks or a month, I can just keep using it. I could use this planner for 5 years if I want to. So that's been a big one too.
I like that. Yeah. So it's almost kind of like a journal with lines in it, but it's not.
Mhm.
Okay.
It has the time, it has even like the days.
Okay.
You can just enter the dates when you use them. So I can still time block everything. So it's not quite a bullet journal. I tried that and I was not consistent enough
I
and
could.
just too much brain power for me. It's beautiful when people can do those though. Not for me. I tried. So it's almost a little like the bullet journal idea though, where you can just kind of make it what you want, but the outlines there and the time is there. So I don't have to fill any of that. And I just block it how I want to and put the dates in as I go.
So you sound so great at just finding what fits for you and what feels good for you, and that body awareness of knowing what your body and your mind needs. Sometimes that comes with a lot of practice, and it sounds like you practice all you've
10
tried.
years of practice for sure. After years of like body neglect or body like thinking exercise had to be a certain way or food had to be a certain way. The whole reason I moved to Denver was to go to school for holistic nutrition so I could control everything about what I was eating and clearly fix all my problems through food. So it's been a big journey to get to this place of having a lot of flexibility. And I think always remembering that even if something's suddenly not working, that doesn't mean nothing ever will again, that it just sometimes means recouping or finding some support or getting back into therapy or whatever it might be.
Yeah, trying to bounce back from those failures or have that resiliency so that, it's not necessarily a failure, it's just an inconsistency that goes along with our ADHD brain that
Right.
feels like a failure.
Knowing it's okay to be inconsistent. Yeah. That our culture really does make it feel like a failure. And I think often we receive those messages of we're inconsistent or we're failures or we're just not trying hard enough or all those things that especially it seems like
Harsh criticism.
all of us women who are like adults and are getting diagnosed now, we're like, why have these been our stories our whole lives of I'm just lazy or I'm not trying hard enough or yeah, and that feeling of being failure or not good enough and realizing that none of that was true. I process information differently than a lot of other people do, and I do things differently than a lot of other people do, and maybe that's actually just okay.
Yeah, it absolutely is okay. Yes. I agree that, the habits and the routines that I have. So I love a lot of different arts. Sometimes I love painting. Sometimes I like jewelry making. Sometimes I like some macrame or this or that, and then dancing. But I don't do everything all at the same time. It goes through phases of what my body needs. Sometimes I need more movement. Sometimes I need to sit and just focus on painting one dot at a time. And I have a planner right now. It does have dates in it, but it doesn't have time blocks. So for me, not having time blocks helps. I just like dates. And yes, I also lose my planner for weeks. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, that planner was really helpful.
Yeah, and that's like you can start, it's like fresh again, right? Like
Oh,
it's actually
hello,
kind
old friend.
of
Come back.
exciting. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So I love all the things that you have provided today as far as just information and tips and just ideas how mindfulness doesn't have to be perfect or consistent to be effective, and how routines and coping skills don't have to be perfect and consistent, and it sometimes is just figuring out what your body needs. And if 1 minute of just being in this moment watching children have their own chaos or meltdowns and being aware of that before you step into mom mode. Sometimes that's all mindfulness has to be. And sometimes it can just be beautifully simple like that. Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely.
Well, I want to ask if anybody out there wants to find out more about you, Nichole, or find out more about your ADHD coaching, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah. So on Instagram, my handle is mindfully_ADHD. I also have a website. It's NicholeBcoaching.com. Um, Website's a bit under construction at the moment, but aren't we all? But yeah, so those are probably the two best ways. I through Instagram, I also have a spot where if people are interested in one-on-one coaching, there's a link to like an application. It's just a short little Google Doc to fill out, and I just send people an email about setting up consultations from there. And I'm actually opening up more space to do more coaching, so taking on more clients as September rolls around here. So excited about that.
Absolutely. And I wish you much success with all of the coaching and everything that you're doing. And I so appreciate your time today, Nichole. Thank
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. This was a lovely conversation.